So our guest tonight, Annabet Ousback, let me tell you a little bit about her. She grew up in the Scandia Boatshed Balmoral Beach in Sydney during the 1950s with her brother Anders, her sister Amanda, and her hardworking parents Gustav and Margaret. Now, while that sounds idyllic, their lives were anything but. Annabet's memoir, Red Herrings for Breakfast, started out as a cathartic exercise to come to terms with the loss of her dear brother Anders. The book opens with a heartbreaking scene of how she learned of Anders' suicide. So, trigger warning here. I think you will have figured that out from the promotion, but Annabet artfully traces her and Anders' life from growing up in Balmoral to traveling, to starting her own family, to divorce, to friendships, to entrepreneurship, and ultimately to the point where Anders departs from our world. And so, Annabet, if you can unmute and turn on, and we'll welcome you to the audience present. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How's everybody this evening? Well, I hope. How are you, Christine?
I'm very well. As you can see, I've brought the library here. I'm not
most impressed. I'm sitting in basically in my little lounge area.
Yeah,
to bench. So we're ready to go.
Yes. Okay. Sorry, we're just. Anne Robinson is just letting us know she's read a review in the Herald. Sorry, I'm being distracted here. So Annabet, you open the story with obviously a very tragic event, and it was heartbreaking to read. And
yes.
I can only imagine. I actually can't imagine. I have no idea what that must have felt like, and then ensuing. So you mentioned that it was a cathartic exercise. What brought you to writing this?
Well, originally Anders and I were going to write the book because I was president of a breakfast club, and I used to write a daily column for the breakfast club, and it was suggested that everything that I wrote about came back to my childhood and things like that, and people said, well, gosh, that's really interesting, maybe you should think about writing a book about growing up in the boatshed and everything. So I thought, because Anders was well known, I really, by virtue of having the same parents, we basically had the same upbringing. So as a consequence, if I went into the public arena with my life, I'm exposing his. So I needed his permission in a way. And he said, well, I'm thinking about doing exactly the same thing. So why don't we combine and write the book together? So we were going to do that, but unfortunately, due to the day-to-day busyness of life, we didn't get around to doing that. So, and then he committed suicide. So I really, really wanted to bring our life together, and expose what he'd been through. And of course, through his journals, I've been able to do that. So writing the book is still both of us together. But it's also, that's why it's been cathartic for me, because I wanted to find the reason why he really did what he did. And of course, that has been brought home to me and exposed to me through his journals. So that's why I've exposed that into the book as well.
Yeah. So for everyone that is not familiar with the book, I can, throughout it, there's little excerpts from Anders' journal, and
yes.
They're both some of them are quite hilarious, and then others are, your heart just drops. And had you any idea that he had these thoughts before you? No. So
no, never. And he was always a different person. He was a genius, and like so many people that have that level of genius, there is that blackness and that that color and that shade. And he could be brilliant and turn it on, and then he could turn it off, and there were signs of things. But when you grow up with someone, you accept and you love them, you accept them for what they are, and you don't really doubt, or see things that probably an outsider coming in would see. And that was Anders. That was my brother. He was quirky. He was black, he was white, he was all shades, as I said earlier. And I think that you loved him, well, I did anyway, for exactly all those quirks and that brilliant mind that he had, and he did have a brilliant mind.
Your parents were quite hard It's fair to say they were tough people to be with.
Well, I don't want to sound like I was harsh upon my parents, but I think a lot of it was to do with the era that we grew up in, because now children are pretty much exposed to everything, and they can interrupt, and parents are very attentive to their needs. But as growing up when we were, you were definitely seen and not heard. And there was no doubt that if you interrupted it, well, you didn't dare interrupt a conversation, because you'd be banished to your bedroom and that would be it, so they seemed a lot harsher. Well, they were harsh, there's no doubt about that, in comparison to today's parenting. But it was also the era. And my father was born in 1910, and he was a Swede, and he was a naval captain, and it was like running the Von Trapp family. I mean, every night at 7 o'clock, there was a big seaman bell, and he would ring the bell. And my goodness, we ran down the corridor, and we stood at the chair, and we did not sit till Dad sat. And we did not pick up a spoon till Dad picked up the spoon. And we were not served till Dad was served first, etc. like that. You know what I mean? So it was very, very much that stilted upbringing that we had. And that was the way it was, that was sort of the era, things that went on behind closed doors stayed behind closed doors. They were not exposed like they are today and spoken about.
And speaking of closed doors, you mentioned that your father was a bit of a closed door, and you had to do a little bit of research without asking him about his life before Australia, because obviously he had to come here way back when.
Well, and there's a part in the book where Anders, my father being a naval captain, he was in the Swedish Navy, and the Swedish Navy, well, Sweden was neutral during the Second World War. And so, of course, anything that happened during the war was to do with Sweden carrying, he carried airplanes from America into Australia and backwards and forwards and things like that. And it was called it a bride ship, and he took Australian brides back to America for the American Americans, and as a consequence, he just didn't want to talk about anything like that. So this particular day, he did tell a story about being shot down or being torpedoed, actually, and was in the water, and a Canadian naval captain came to his rescue. Well, one day Anders came home from school and he said, "Dad, you can't believe it, but you know that Canadian captain that saved you from the Atlantic that day?" He said, "Well, what of it?" He said, "Well, I met his son at school today. You cannot believe it, can you?" And Dad said, "Well, that's the way it is." And Anders said, "Don't you want to meet him?" He said, "Gosh, no, of course, no, I don't want to meet him at all." So that was, that was that closed off. He didn't want to discuss war. He didn't want to talk about anything like that. So we were always surprised at anything to do with that he would never discuss, and especially that particular time that we thought perhaps he would want to meet that Canadian captain. And Anders was very good friends with him, the boy, but he didn't want to know about the father, didn't want to know at all. So that was, he was very closed off about so many things that we didn't learn about, so it was only in research that I actually found out a lot of information about my father.
Yeah. And you mentioned in the book that how your parents met was quite, and how they actually eventually married was a little bit of a tumultuous journey in itself, never mind the period afterwards.
Oh, yes, it was. Well, my mother was working in a Searles, which was a florist shop in King Street in the city, and opposite there was a friend of hers that was working at Albert's Music. And the lady that was working at Albert's Music was dating a Swedish fellow or an officer, and whenever he was in port they used to go out. So of course one day he said he brought a friend along, and my mother was invited to meet the other friend, and she expected, she said that her girlfriend Cecily was dating the Swede that she was dating, was so handsome, so tall, so beautiful, it was just unbelievable, and she was so thrilled to go. And she was incredibly disappointed when she met my father, who she was introduced to, because she said he was the antithesis of everything that was strong and blonde and handsome and everything, and Swedish manhood. All of a sudden, this fellow, she said I kept looking across at who she was dating and looked at your father and thought, no, No, not at all. There's
So your poor father had to work very hard to get any
I know,
attention from your
very,
mother at
very hard.
all. Yeah.
Incredibly hard. And then, I mean, he went away and it kept writing to her and asked, you know, to be married. And she said, no, 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 absolutely not. There's no way that I could marry you. I mean, you know, my mother would never forgive me. She hates me and she hates foreigners. She hates sailors and you're all of those. And frankly, I don't love you. And it was a bit sad, actually, but very sad. So he went away, but was determined to win her. And he came back and said, look, the offer of a ring still stands. So I really like to, you know, offer you that. And she said, oh, well, all right. And I said, all right. Why would you say all right? She said, well, I felt dreadfully sorry for him. He just kept asking me. And I thought, all right. So it was pathetic the whole way through, really. And then, of course, when they became engaged, my mother said, well, where are we going to live? And my father said, what do you mean? She said, well, we have to decide on what suburb. We have to find somewhere to live and buy a property or something. And he said, well, we're going back to Sweden. That's understood. You marry me, you're my wife, you come back to Sweden. She said, no, no, no. That was never understood. You know, I don't want to get married anymore. So she tried to break off the engagement. So as a consequence, my father gave up Sweden. He gave up his family. He gave up his friends. He gave up everything for my mother because he loved her so much. And
unfortunately,
it didn't work.
You're right. Many times she just wasn't reciprocated. So that could have.
Well, she was damaged from her background. She was damaged.
Yeah.
You know, it was really, really sad, you know.
Two people that, you know, something that we touched on is like two people who were fundamentally traumatized for whatever reason, damaged, got together. And then
well, it is very, very sad that you know, and then they have children that are a product of that. So, you know, the damage is collateral. You know, and no wonder I'm on to my third husband. If you can't be a good example, be a horrible warning. And that was my parents, you know. So they you know, and I think it was the times and everybody stayed together because in those days you didn't get divorced. There was no such thing as, you know, a single mother's pension or, you know, anything like that. You just didn't have it. You either got out and, you know, had the scorn of being a widow or a single woman or a divorcee or something. And I mean, whatever it was, if you're a woman on your own, you know, you weren't looked as favourably as somebody who was married. So you tended to, I think there must have been a lot of sadness in the past in marriages because you just stuck together for the sake of, because you couldn't get out. It was just easier to stay and struggle on, you know.
And you know, one of the descriptions you say that you know, they didn't have children straight away, and then it was almost like a how was it you described it? It was almost like, you know, your mum was like, what, you think I can't get pregnant? Well,
yeah, well well they were married for 5 years. Mum was 25 when they got married, so mum was basically 30 years of age, and he just said to her, you know, you're not capable of having a baby, you're obviously too old. And she said hopping mad, and she just said, well, I'll show him. And she basically got pregnant straight. How dare he suggest it? I'm too old. So she basically got pregnant straight away. So, and as I said in the book, I was a bit sad. I always thought I was a wanted baby, not a revenge baby. But anyway, he wouldn't even come to the hospital and see me. He was so disgusted that, you know, he had a daughter because he only wanted a son. You know, wow. And of course then within months, Mum was pregnant again, and she said, all I wanted was a boy. I just prayed for a boy, just because that's all he wanted.
Because of, yeah.
So he wouldn't even, as I said, he wouldn't come to the hospital and see me. He just didn't want to know. And Mum said, you know, do you mind if I, you know, call her Annabet? And he said, I don't care what you call her. I don't care what you call her, you know. So, you know, so that's, Annabet's a Dutch name, not a Swedish name, which is what the rest of the family, you know, have been called. So
yeah. Oh gosh, so tough.
Well, it is what it is, isn't it? You know, you don't know, you know, until you actually get out and compare your life to everybody else's life. You don't actually know that it's bad, you know. And we had the whole of Balmoral Beach. You know, we were very lucky. We were very fortunate. We had a wonderful upbringing in so many ways, you know, because you just escaped to the bush, you escaped to the water, you escaped to the sand. You know, and there was Anders and I, and we were thick as thieves and together all the time. So we had one another. So you don't realise that you have any hardship,
Yeah.
It is what it
So,
is.
so I'm just going to bring up, I'm sure most of our guests tonight are familiar, but I'm just going to bring up a photo. It's an older photo. It's not as old as the one on the cover of your book, but of the Balmoral Boatshed. It, as idyllic as it sounds, living right on the water and listening to the lapping of of the waves as they come in, I'm sure it was quite an interesting life to lead as a young child with so
Oh, yeah.
many dangers around and places to hide and things to kill you, literally kill you as a young kid. What was that like? How do you?
Well, we had lots of, oh gosh, I mean, I don't know how old that photograph, well, when, that looks like something from Bob Walton, because it's completely different now, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, there's
I
that,
mean,
yeah.
in the
And
background, you can see that's one of your photos, isn't it?
well, that would have actually been around, because when my parents bought the boatshed in 1946, they obviously named it Scandia Boatshed. So as you can see on top of the building that's there now, it says boats for hire. So that was obviously prior to, because Jack Joel built the boatshed, and that was in 1923. So Mum and Dad bought it in 46. So I don't quite know when that photograph was actually taken. It was in Mum and Dad's possession, so I'm assuming it was given to them, or it was taken almost at the time that they purchased the boatshed without actually having the sign put on the top of it. So, and that was you flicked onto the other boat. Onto another. No, that's okay. I was just going to say that was when there was a really bad storm. You can see around, that was the bars that were next door. So, there's been lots of bad storms.
Was there any storms that you remember? Like, what was?
Oh gosh, yes. I mean, during bad storms, it was awful for Mum and Dad, because, Dad would be sitting up all night having to watch the moorings and everything like that, because they, of course, boats that were moored at the boatshed, but that was his responsibility, and he used to go out in a rowing boat, and he with a torch, and he would check all the mooring ropes and everything like that. So, of course, if anything happened to any boat, it was his responsibility. So he didn't sleep on those nights. And Mum said that she didn't sleep either, because she felt guilty, tucked up in a warm bed. So she'd sit in the kitchen with a blanket around her. She knew she couldn't do anything, but,
she was there holding vigil.
Probably guilt, knowing my mother.
And so what was it like? Like, was it, did the building feel like it was shaking? Like, what was
Christmas, actually, December was the king tides, and the king tides would come through the bottom, of the boatshed, and would wash through. There was the lounge room, and then there was the kitchen that went into the milk bar area, which is the same level as it is today. When you walk to the boatshed now, it's all, all the building is upstairs, all the housing, the bedrooms or the lounge. I don't know what it's like now. I haven't actually gone in there, but all the living area is upstairs, and all the downstairs area, of course, is the boatshed. Well, when I was there, half of it was, our living area was downstairs. And so, of course, when the waves came through at king tides came through at Christmas, we were paddling through our lounge room, ankle deep water and everything like that. And Mum just said that was the time she hated, because she'd have to immediately try and roll up a carpet or something like that. And, but it was exciting to us. It was fun, racing through, your lounge room and kitchen with ankle deep water. And then you'd sit out on the veranda and you'd have your breakfast, which was why I named the book Red Herrings for breakfast, because every day that's what we had, little red herrings with boiled eggs every day for breakfast.
Did you get tired of it? Do you still eat red herrings for breakfast?
Gosh, no, I don't. But the thing is, I always got exotic food going to school, and I hated it. I hated having herrings, and I hated having all this sort of exotic sort of food. And all I craved, I remember Mum finding out one day that I was continually swapping my lunch with somebody else for jam sandwiches. She was absolutely appalled. All I wanted was just,
I'm giving you this wonderful food, and you go and for jam sandwich.
I know, but she was like, oh, anyway, it's things like that. So as I said, you don't realise, how your life is until you have comparisons with somebody else, and it's always better you know,
Yes.
somebody's life is always better. Their home life is better, the food is better, their mother's nicer, their father's kinder, you know, all that sort of thing. So
Yeah. So I mean the way you write about your experiences, you can tell that they're, you know, you've got fond memories, but there's, you know, reading them, I'm like, oh my God, you did what? So that
yeah, I know.
the Blood Brothers story,
Oh gosh,
where
well,
did that, how did
I have
Anders?
the scar here, you know. Yes, well, he, you know, that was Anders, you know, and he was always a bit, little bit different, you know, and he, you know, Dad of course had beer bottles, and they're the large Resh's beer, and my brother said, "Do you want to become blood brothers?" Because we, you know, he'd seen about it and read about it or something, and I said, "Yeah, sure, that's great." And so he got a beer bottle out of the garbage, and he said, "Meet me up around the back of the Moreton Bay Fig," and we raced up there, and he grabbed the beer bottle by the neck, smashed it against the tree, and sort of gave this neck of frill bottle to me and said, "You go first, slash your wrist," you know. And I sort of tried, and he said, no, you've got to change hands. We've got to do the right wrist because, you know, because I'm being right-handed, I was trying to do the left wrist. No, we've got to be blood brothers, and you've got to put your right wrist together like the Indians do. And I said, "I'm too scared, I can't do it." So he grabbed the bottle and went, "I'll do it," slash, right through a vein. And of course, typical Anders was like, "Oh, I'm going to get into trouble." So he shot through and left me to stagger into the milk bar and find Mum with, you know, dripping blood. "Oh, what have you done?" she said, you know. So that was, of course, another. But I've still got that. But that was Anders, you know. He would always do these, you know. And I always fell for it. Always fell for it. You know, everything he did. "Do you want to try this?" Yeah, okay. "You want to do that?" "Yeah, okay." I was not very bright, I think. I always believed him, and, you know, he was always a bit of a scallywag, I suppose.
So without giving, you know, we won't talk too much more about the Balmoral experience, but the scene. I just wanted to ask, you know, do you still get nightmares from it when you had to dive in the middle of the night? What?
Yeah.
Can you swim in the ocean ever since? Has it?
No, I'm not a mad. I don't. I'm not a mad swimmer now. I think, you know, I should be, because living at Balmoral, you know, and the water's just opposite. Yeah, but that was for people that don't know. My mother and father used to have to bail out the boats if they got water. They'd have to, and Mum had. It was mainly Mum's responsibility, and they had like large jam tins, and they would go out and bail water out. If there was heavy rain or something like that, and these half cabins would get filled with water, they'd go and take the large jam tins and bail the water out. And of course, this was quite laborious, and so my father made a pump, and it was like large metal, like a copper pipe, and it had like a bit of a lip in it and a leather plunger. And he would, a wooden plunger with a leather thong lip, and he would go like this, and of course the water would come out, like he'd use it as a pump, of course. And he was so proud of it, and it worked so well, but he refused to lend it to anybody else. So of course he hid it, and he wouldn't even let Mum use it. Mum still had to use the jam tins, and so she found it.
Well, you know, I know he's very proud of it. Why not even let your wife use it?
No, he wouldn't, and he hid it. But Mum found out where it was hidden, so of course she just got sick to death of using the jam tins, and so she went out and to pump out a boat, and got into the dinghy and dropped the pump overboard. Now, if you know Balmoral Beach and you know where all the moorings are, I can't remember which boat it actually was, how far out it was. But even if it was the closest one, there's still a long way out, and the water's terribly, terribly deep. And so I got shaken awake at about, it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and told to go down to the laundry and meet my mother in the laundry. And my brother was already there, and we both like eyes in saucers, you know, looking at each other. And she was.
How old were you?
I was about 9.
Yeah.
9 years of age, and he was a year younger. And she just opened the cupboard of the laundry where all our swimming costumes and towels were kept, and she threw a costume at each of us and threw a towel, and she said, "Get changed into your costumes. I've dropped the pump. You're going to have to go and dive for it." And
Because she
Anders
couldn't swim.
immediately. I was a very strong swimmer, but Anders was 5 weeks premature, and he always had bronchitis most of his life because of a weak chest. And he was not a strong swimmer, not at all. And we went to calisthenics to try and build him up all the time. I was strong, but Anders wasn't. And he just said, I can't do that. I can't do that. And Mum said, well, can't. You have to. And that's all there is to it. So, but Mum couldn't swim, you see. So we went through the boat shed with our towels around us, huddled together, put us in a dinghy. She rowed us out. And then she had this torch that she flicked onto the water. And she said, so this is the boat.
She was more afraid of
him,
father's reaction than
her children drowning. Basically, yes. So, and she just sort of put the torch onto the water, so it sort of shone this light onto the water. And she said, Annabet, you take it in turns, dive into the light. And I remember standing on the gunnels, and my legs were, of the rowboat, and my legs were like jelly. And I can't do this. And what about the sharks, Mum? What about the sharks? And she said, there's no sharks. Sharks don't come out at night. That's a lie. Of course they do.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, she said, sharks don't come out at night. You'll be right. And I just said, I'm really scared. And she said, be brave. Just be brave. And I dived into the light and propelled myself down as far as I could. And then I came up with nothing. And of course, she moved the light. It was Anders's turn, moved the light. And my turn, Anders's turn, until she moved the light all the way around. And of course, I was terrified I was going to come up under the boat and knock myself out, or shark would get me, or my lungs were going to burst, because by the time you sort of dived up and propelled yourself down, gosh, you couldn't have time to feel around, But we did find it. Bring it up. And then she threw us sort of the trowel around our shoulders and rowed us back in and said, you're never, ever, ever to discuss this. She put the pump back. She said, it's back. Your father never needs to know. And so I thought, gosh, I can't have imagined that correctly. That's no mother would do that to a child. I've got that wrong. So I rang up Anders this particular day and I said, do you remember when Mum made us dive with the pump? And he said, oh, gosh, poor Mum. I said, poor Mum? What about poor us? And he said, that bastard made her do it, made her do it. So, of course, he had such a hatred toward our father that he...
But he still, throughout the book, it was obvious he still craved your father's love or your father's respect even. But
I think we all did. And that's the thing, when somebody's so harsh, and as a child, you always think there's something wrong that you've done. And so you're always trying to please them. It's like, why are you upset with me? What have I done wrong now? Why don't you approve of where I'm going or what I'm doing or what I'm saying or what I'm thinking, anything, and so you're always craving some sort of attention and some sort of respect in your own way. I think it's quite sad, quite sad what parents can do to children without realising that it's affecting you so badly, and you don't understand until you get much older and you look back and see the games that are being played. But as kids, you're innocent.
That's just what you know. And so you were what, 11 or so when your parents decided they've had enough of the boat?
Well, what actually happened? My father had very bad sciatica. He'd fallen from as a young sailor when he joined the Swedish Merchant Navy when he was quite young. He fell from the top of a mast onto the deck below and damaged his back quite badly. So he had sciatica, which was to plague him for the rest of his life. So as a consequence, they decided to sell the boat shed, which they did. And that was, they got an offer which sold the boat shed to Bob Walton, and we moved in January 1964. So I had done my first year at Mossman High School. So, and then we moved to Newport in January 1964. So Anders was to go into his first year at Pittwater High that year, and I was to go into my second year of high school at Pittwater High. So,
So
and then we lived there.
it was a very different experience than living
Oh
right on
gosh.
the beach.
Oh yeah, I know, because no one wanted to visit me. Everyone wanted to visit me when I, had Balmoral Boatshed. I mean, every weekend we had somebody wanting to come and stay. And I was always terribly upset about the fact that no one ever invited me back to stay overnight, or very, very few people did. And I remember years later saying, how come you always want to come to my house every weekend? They went, well, who wouldn't want to spend a night in the boatshed? You've got your boats, you've got the water, you've got the swimming, you've got all these wonderful things. And why would you want to come and stay at my house? It's a suburban house and a suburban street and a little backyard of lawn and this sort of thing. They were too embarrassed, and that's all I wanted, to go to somewhere different. What we had in Balmoral Beach was what we had. So what?
And to add hurt to insult, didn't you just have renovated some of the Balmoral house?
Yes,
much
I know.
Nicer?
Yes, as I said, we were living downstairs, especially in the King Tide areas. As I said, we were living downstairs, and Mum got sick to death of it, and eventually my father moved everything upstairs, because half of the boat shed that was upstairs was actually a large workroom. So he used that area to make all living area. So downstairs was all then going to be boat shed, and all upstairs. So we finally got a beautiful bedroom and new bathroom and all these and Mum, I remember Mum going through American Vogue magazines and being so excited because, she'd seen things because Dad was wonderful with his hands to be able to make wooden things, So he made her a big wooden bench with wheels on it that she could wheel around. She said, look at this, this is out of the latest American Vogue and things like that. But of course, we're only there for 1 year. And then Bob Walton came knocking, and they made a deal. And of course, so we'd sold the property after the boat shed after only 12 months of living in the renovated area. So that was a little bit, yeah. I know, that was unexpected.
And you had to move back in with your sister as well, didn't you?
Oh, I know, but I know, that was really depressing. Yes, I know. I mean, especially when there was 6 years the difference, and I was so sophisticated as a 12-year-old. Did I want to live with a 6-year-old? No, I did not. I needed my own bedroom. But anyway, Anders, being the only boy, he always had his own bedroom, and his own privacy, but I always had to share right up to the end.
Do you think, just reading from your memoir, that you and Anders, you were close, but he was still very cheeky, very kind of he was almost antagonistic in some ways.
Well, that's his nature, and I think that he was always challenging. You know what I mean? He could, and I mean, I remember, like things that he would do to me, and I remember this particular day, he was sitting opposite me at the dining table. Oh, gosh, I would have been about 14. Oh, you'd think I'll be old enough to know better. I mean, especially when I knew what his nature was like, but I still fell all the time for every trick that he put on me. And he'd say, lay your arm across the table. So, you lay your arm across the table, make a fist. He said, I'm going to test your strength. See how strong you actually are. And I went, yep, okay. So he said, I'm going to hold your fist down. So he put his arm across and held my hand as firmly as he could. He said, I want you to try and resist me. So I, with all my strength like this, and I even, grabbed the seat of my, my chair, and I was to anchor myself to get the strength. And then he let go. And of course, I catapulted into my mouth, split all of his, blood everywhere. And of course, Mum! And of course, Mum comes running out of the kitchen, said, what have you done, Anders? What have you done? And he said, she's stupid. It's her own fault, this sort of thing. But I always fell for it, you see. He was always a bit. But he was wonderful in so many ways, but then that cheeky side would come out.
Were you friends, when you were both feral teenagers?
Yes. It changed a lot, of course, as you grow up, because being little, we were inseparable. But as, of course, we went to school and there's outside influences, and I was always a beach babe, if you know what I mean. I loved the surf beach, and Anders was into foreign movies. He loved the foreign movie festivals.
He was sophisticated even as a teenager.
Absolutely. I was collecting Beatles albums and things like that. He was always into Barbara Streisand. I mean, it was all there, wasn't it? I wanted, cork, high heels with cork. He wanted Ferragamo loafers and things like that. So, of course, it was always that sophistication and style Oh yes, he had so much of that. So, which is a hallmark of my brother, really is.
Yeah.
Everything was exquisite, everything he chose. Like when I got married at 21, he gave me the most beautiful plate. It was a glass plate. And I thought, oh, glass plate, okay. It was Lalique, you know what I mean? I think he appreciated. Why didn't he give me just a rabia or something like that, something practical, you know, that I could have used, you know? No, it had to be this beautiful Lalique plate.
It's a case of nature and nurture. He was
I
definitely,
know,
nature was, because you both had the very same upbringing. It's
I
not
know,
you
but
were
he was
exposed to different
always,
things.
just had so much style that I just didn't understand. But it was
Yeah.
just sort of in him. It was always in him, you know, because he didn't. Mum loved beautiful things, and Mum had a lot of style, and Dad loved beautiful things too. But it was just different with Anders. It was on a sort of an area of his own. It's you
And
know.
he started his career with wine very early, I believe.
Yes. Well, Dad always loved wines and was, I like to think he was a bit of a wine connoisseur. And he, underneath the lounge room the dining room in Newport, he built a wine cellar. And Dad was always saying that he was going to cut out where the dining table was and make a lift that we could sit at the dining table and push a button and go downstairs into the wine cellar and pick a wine, you know.
Like from Get Smart days.
Yeah, I know. It was just something like, you know, so that's where Dad was a bit quirky in certain areas too, you know, but they didn't. So, of course, Anders, then one of Anders's first jobs as, a 16-year-old, I can't remember now, was at the wine shop down in Newport. The Downses owned the wine shop, and he would go down there and he learnt all about wines. And of course, I think he was trying to connect so much with Dad, because he would come back and say, Dad, you know, they've got this wine and you should, you know, think about cellaring this, and, you know, yada, yada. So there was this a love of wines that was through Dad, and, you know,
So
that actually started it.
His way of finding a common ground, I guess.
Yes, possibly, but
Your father was pretty hard on you both. I mean, he probably
oh
was
yes,
harder on.
oh yeah, but tough. There's no doubt about that. There's no doubt about that. But then, as one of Anders's school friends was Mark Telliger, and Mark's father was Stan Telliger, and Stan's a very well-known artist at the time, and one of his good friends was Len Evans. So of course, knowing Anders's love of wines through Dad. You know, Stan said to Mark, you should invite Anders along, because I'm having Len Evans. He may be interested to meet Len Evans. So he came along, and of course Len and he had a good discussion about wines, and Len said, when you leave school, what are you going to do? And he said, Dad wants me to be a fitter and turner. He said, you're never going to be a fitter and turner. Why don't you come and work for me? So that's what actually happened. He did. And that's how he started his career with Len Evans at Bulletin Place as a 17-year-old when he left school.
How amazing.
And the rest is history.
Yeah.
With Anders,
And
yeah.
so you went through a period, like we'll jump ahead a little bit, and you both
yes.
had your own travel experiences. You went to London, and then you did a little bit of a sidebar to Sweden, and
Yes.
you a little bit
Met relatives
and met your, you know, your father's side of the family. How was that?
He had two sisters. One sister had one child, and that's Birgitta. And Birgitta was head of the Swedish boys' choir. That was she was very, very well known. And the boys' choir would sing in front of other heads of Europe, and so she was extremely well known and quite sort of famous in Sweden, if you know. And in fact, she did a tour out to Australia at one stage. And the other sister had 5 children, and those. They're all my cousins, of course, but so I met all of those, and they took me, and living in different areas in Sweden, of course, they were married, and I've gone back a few times, and we're still all, you know, in communication on a regular basis. It's lovely, and their children are friends with on Facebook with my children, so it's the generation has continued on. And
did your father ever go back? Did he ever visit?
Oh yes, he went back. He went back a couple of times, but I don't think Mum never felt very comfortable about it, and I think she didn't really get on with one of the sisters. Yes, she went back. She didn't get on particularly with one of the sisters, and you know, Mum was a bit. If she liked you, she, you know, but she wouldn't make an effort. Do you know what I mean? you know, that's all there is to it. So I think it was a bit difficult for Mum going back there.
Yeah. And so, I mean, before you even left on your travels, you met your first husband.
Oh, yes. Yes, right.
That seemed to be, he hung around, bless him.
Yeah, well, that was
He was there. I feel like it was a bit like how your father got your mother. He bagged
yes,
you, basically.
yes, it was. It was actually almost history repeating itself, and it's really sad because you know, I broke up with him. I went overseas. We were together and I went overseas. And when I actually met him, I had already made plans to meet a girlfriend 6 months hence. And so I was determined that I was going to go. And so, you know, he would write to me. So he said, oh, please don't go. And I said, no, I'm going. That's all there is to it. So if it's, you know, and we'll come back together. And of course, going overseas and spreading your wings and meeting so many different people and seeing so much of life, it changes you, you know. And I come back and I'm not interested in this boy anymore, you know. I mean, I was 21 years of age. I was fickle. What can I say? I had a few flings overseas. It was, you know, what can I say? I mean, yeah, I had a fling with a hairdresser.
He got into your mother's head, and then therefore she got into.
Yeah, and so I came back and I broke up with him straight away, and he just wouldn't accept that. And so he used to come and hang around home every day and visit Mum and say, oh, you know, I just want to see her. And it's like, you know, all right, we'll just stay there and she'll be home soon. And then I'd come home and I go, oh, what are you doing here? Go away. And this sort of thing. And Mum got sick to death of him hanging around. And she said, please go back with him. I can't stand it. He's just driving me insane. He's never going to go away. So in the end, I just weakened. You know, I sort of should have stood my ground, but, you know, it was fated. And so I ended up marrying him. But, yeah, it was pretty miserable. It wasn't a happy marriage, and it was destined from the word go. You know, you can't break up with someone because you don't love them and then go back and marry them and think it's going to work and be fabulous. It's gone, you know. So
and you had a couple of really tough decisions to make before you even got married as well. Like,
oh yeah, well, pregnancy. Yeah, that was really sad. Yeah, I fell pregnant, and yeah, that was the hardest decision. Still the hardest decision I ever had to make. You know, but basically that was almost taken out of my hands too. Well, it was taken out of my hands. I had no decision, no choice in the matter really. It was like, you know, we either, you know, face Dad, who I couldn't face, and say I'm pregnant, I need to get married because I'm pregnant, or, you know, face his mother, who was a Catholic and thought I was a virgin. So that was, you know.
You're right that she wore a red dress to your wedding anyway.
She did. She thought I was the Scarlet Woman. She didn't know. She didn't know what I'd gone. Yeah. It was. Well, those were the times, you know. And of course, these days you don't even have.
Easier.
I know. Gosh, you don't even have to. I mean, here we are engaged to be married. I'm going over the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and he's saying to me, "Take your engagement ring off and put it in the glove box. I've beaten the abortionist down in price." I mean, it's, you know. I mean, really. I mean, in this day and age, you don't even have to be married to have a baby.
Yeah.
You know. I mean, it's ridiculous, you know, what you went through in those. And this was only like 50 years ago.
Exactly. It's changed so much, and largely for the better, thank goodness.
Oh, yes, absolutely for the best. I think it's wonderful now. The choices that a woman has got is just amazing. But in these days, it was like the shame, you know, you were just, it wasn't worth the heartache, you know, of what you were going to be put through. So you bent to all the rules and that everybody else placed upon you without allowing your own choice and your own, you know, what you wanted. And of course, we were committed to marriage at that stage. I'd agreed that I would marry him, and I had the engagement ring. We were going to have babies, and then, you know, I would walk down the aisle 6 months pregnant. That would be appalling. We couldn't do that. Yeah. So, I mean, and then we had 2 foot, and I always, you know, wonder about that child.
Yeah, of course.
But, you know, it is what it is. You know, you have to accept that these things have happened, and you can't dwell on them. But, you know, thank goodness things have changed for the best, yes.
Yeah. And so you went on to have 2 beautiful children, and posed its own challenges as well.
You know. Yeah.
Where were you, in Papua New Guinea or somewhere like that?
Oh, yes. My daughter, Elin. Yes, Elin. How you feeling, Elin? She used to say to people, how you feeling? She was born in Port Moresby, so that was, yes. You don't, You don't really know you're living till you've had a baby in Port Moresby. You've got a Trobriand Islander on this side, you've got a Chimbu warrior wife on the other side, and they've all got their different chants. When they go into labour, they all have their different chants. And I'm in the middle saying, oh, put me in the labour ward. He said, you're into labour ward, missus. So, you know, this sort of thing. So, and they pull a gingham curtain around you, and you can see the feet walking by and everything, and you're saying, that's the labour ward? Yeah. You know, that was... Ended up getting hepatitis, so I had to leave anyway. So I'm not surprised.
Gosh, yeah, hepatitis A.
Wow. Anyway, I got out of there.
Yeah,
I knew something would have to take me
out of there.
Yeah. So
and the marriage broke down, and then you found yourself sewing for a living.
Yes.
Yes. And
well, yes, I did. I'd always been a sewer, because when my grandmother was the most beautiful. My mother's mother was a beautiful sewer. In fact, she was an embroiderer for the Mrs. Bonney, which was which has since went on to become Adrian and Mrs. Bonney, and beautiful embroiderer. And and my mother was a very good sewer, but she couldn't embroider like my nana. So my mother would make a dress and throw it at my grandmother and say, "Fix it up," and my nana would embroider. You know, so that was sort of like osmosis.
And you found you kind of found a bit of a connection with your mum through
the sewing. Yes, because I started a children's wear shop, because when I was at school I used to make bikinis for children, visit my school friends and everything, and charge 5 shillings. I'd get up early in the morning and I'd turn the wheel on the old Singer sewing machine, so I didn't wake Dad. While Dad kept snoring, I kept sewing, you know, this sort of thing. And I would make a bikini and sell it for 5 shillings. So I always had that love, you know, which is what I wanted to do. But my father wanted an academic in the family, so there's no way that I was ever going to go and become a seamstress or anything like that. That's no. That's a hobby. That's not a job, you know. So of course I ended up having a children's wear shop. I fell into that because I made clothes for my children, and people said, gosh, you know, where do you buy them? I said, I made them. So sort of one thing led to another, and I ended up having a children's wear shop. So which started, and then of course I went on to manufacturing and getting into David Jones and all sorts of things like that. So just sort of, I think I just sort of fell into a lot of these things, you know, really not even sometimes, you know, your desire to go a certain way, but fate steps in and, you know, gives you an opportunity, so you take it, I guess.
Yeah. And you know what, we're almost at the end of time, so if there is a couple of questions, I'm not sure the questions are they the answers. I'll read out a couple of them. They're sure. More statements. And now I just wanted to say to our guests tonight, we've actually only touched on a small fraction of the detail that's in this book, Red Herrings for Breakfast. So there's honestly a world more information, stories.
Too much, isn't it? It's too much, really.
I think we need 3 hours if we're to discuss it properly. But there's a lady, Pam Bailey. Hi, Annabet. I'm looking forward to this. She sent this to us at the very start of the event, and she said, I'm so looking forward to this. I was a friend of Anders, and for several years prior to his death, I traveled to Wombara and did his books. I first met him in the 70s.
Of course.
When both worked at Summit restaurants. We had many friends in common.
Yes, I know, Pam. I know, of course. So lovely to... Sorry, I can't see you, Pam. Yes, I know. Anders was incredibly fond of Pam.
And she also said, Anders, when I was at Wombara, always had 2 poached eggs for breakfast. I can see the family resemblance.
Yes. That's...
So we've got Pauline Wall, and she's asked, I guess this is your first book. Do you do more?
Yes, I'm writing again, but you know, it's very hard to concentrate when you've got so much activity going on with this book. You know, there's things in the press coming out, and like tonight, and you know, a lot to take my attention away from focusing on something else. So, but I have started, yeah.
And we really only touched on Anders a little bit. There's so much, you've got so many stories to tell, and your tenacity and resilience in living in a household where really Anders was this revered. I mean, even your mother was, you know, started to really favor him above you.
Oh gosh, yes. Well, you know, he did her proud, didn't he? He became highly respected and very well known, and of course, you know, she had something to tell people about. He's my son, you know. So it, you know, it made her look good. He made her. Whereas when he was much younger, of course, it was quite.
He was sickly and
very sickly, and she did some dreadful things. You know, dreadful things. I mean, you know, she stuck, you know, pins in him because she said he'd just lay in his cot or his pram or anything and would just stare. And so she said I used to stick nappy pins into him to make him have some reaction, you know, because he would just stare like a void. And then the other time I wrote in the book, she put him outside in the pram in the sun, and went back inside the milk bar, and she, of course, where she had the milk bar, she was working and attending to customers coming in and out. And she said it started to rain. It'd been raining for some time, and she said eventually I heard this, what sounded like the pitiful meowing of a cat. And she said I realised it was Anders was outside in the rain, and of course he was sodden and, you know, in his mattress, and was just quite distraught at that stage. And she said she simply forgot about him. Brought him in, put him in a hot bath, and he was all right, you know. But she wasn't maternal like our mother.
No, clearly not.
No, poor mum. It fed me, you know. When I was a baby, she kept complaining, you know, to her cousin. She said, this child just screams all the time. She won't just take her milk. And she said, well, maybe because mum never breastfed, she couldn't bear that. And she said, you know, maybe the milk's too hot. And she said, She said, I give it to her cold out of the fridge. I didn't know you had to heat it, you know. So poor mum, you know, she really didn't have much of an idea. So the fact that we survived it all, we're quite stoic, I'd say. Quite resilient.
PN, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. Very interesting. Thanks, Annabet. I read that Anders was a keen collector of Australian pottery.
Yes.
Quite a large collection, 300 plus pieces, which was never displayed. Is that right? Was there a reason for that?
I don't know. I don't know about, look, when he, the thing is with my brother, he had a house that was minimalist, and he didn't like any show or any display of what he considered to be wealth. So he would keep things in boxes, and every now and then he would bring out a piece that he loved and he would put it on display. And so, you know, there also wasn't a lot of shelves, and there wasn't a lot of wall space because he had a lot of glass in one bar. So as a consequence, there wasn't a lot of area to display things in anyway. So when he died, a lot of boxes, all his boxes of pottery that he collected, mainly Asian, he loved Asian pottery too, was catalogued and sent to auction as part of, you know, part of what, you know, what he had to hand over, I suppose, or what had to be part of.
Pam has just said he was a well-renowned potter for himself.
Yes, absolutely. Beautiful, beautiful, wonderful pottery. And he used to put in, he had a number of exhibitions, 3 or 4, I think, can't remember exactly, through Rex Irwin, which is was in not Crown Street, which is Queen Street in Wallara. And I've still got some of his beautiful pieces that he gave me for Christmas and birthdays. Beautiful, large, beautiful bowls that are collector's items. And he kind of built up. But he did pottery at school, and he was clever, and he would make vases and things for mum and bring them home, and mum loved them, you know, and would use the vases all the way through the house. You know, anything he made was just perfect, even as I said, at school. Whereas I'd make things and mum would just sort of look at me and sort of raise an eyebrow and say, it's a vase. And she'd go, oh, really? Mine never sort of made any sense to my mother.
Before you read his journals, and before, you know, obviously he ended his life ultimately.
Yes.
No, he was such a tortured soul.
Yes.
Did you have a
Yes, he was. He was, because I think he you know, there was so much that I just discovered going through his journals about what he'd been through. A lot of it was cryptic. Like he said to me, one day I'll tell you what our father did to me, one day. And he never did. No, he didn't. And that's something that I will always have to live with, that question mark. But it's, if you read the book, it's fairly evident, you know, really. I mean, you can draw your own conclusion, but it's only drawing a conclusion. It's not drawing of anything factual. But there was definitely a lot that went on that was hidden. And I think children go through experiences that they keep to themselves because they have to keep things hidden, or they're too embarrassed, or they don't think they're going to be believed. I don't know, because, but there was definitely...
But both your parents asked you both to keep secrets all the time. So
yes, that's exactly right. And I think if there was any abuse from my father, well, by virtue of the fact that that's what an abusive person does to a child, they make them feel like, you know, you have to keep this quiet, or you're special, that's why I'm doing this for you. I don't know. I've never been in that position. So as a consequence, it's something that there's obviously a guilt, and you keep things very private because, well, I think a lot of it is to do with children don't ever think they're going to be believed.
Yeah.
You know, if they divulge. But my mother obviously knew a lot, because I think when my brother came over for his 40th birthday, I was living at the house at the time, although down one end. My brother went up, and but he left. He came to me and he said to me, "You know I'm gay." I said, "Yeah, so." You know, I love you. You're wonderful. And he said to me, well, that's the reason why I don't have try not to have too much influence on Tony, which was my son. And I said, Anders, you're my brother. I love you. You know, it makes no difference to me. Of course I know. So, but I do think that's the night he went up and challenged mum and dad. Oh, not so much mum, but challenged dad about that and brought that to a head, because he didn't stay for very long. The next thing, the car just revved out of the driveway and he was gone. And I said to mum the next morning, gosh, Anders didn't stay long last night. And she just said, well, you know your father. So I don't know. Mum never spoke either. But and Anders never came back to the house until after Dad died. So that was, many years later. Yeah, so there was definitely a lot. And I think Anders didn't tell me because of what actually happened, because he obviously was trying to protect me. You know, I would think you didn't want me to know the truth about what happened. So I'm left with always wondering.
Pam is asking what happened to the film script he was writing.
Oh gosh, I have it, Pam. I have it. He left it to me, Pam. He left it to me and he said, look, maybe someday you can do something with it. But the advice that's been given, he did hand it to somebody to look at, somebody who I believe was part of Baz Luhrmann, who worked with Baz Luhrmann at the time, and he said it needed some more tension. So I thought maybe I could sort of maybe try and rewrite it, but I think it's a different sort of writing. A movie script is totally different to writing a memoir. So I don't think I have the expertise, but yes, but I have it. It's wonderful. It's terrific. It's terrific. It's called The Dining Room, and it's about anyway, I won't go into it, but it's based on characters that he knew in the industry, in the restaurant industry.
When we were talking about Andrew's success as a potter, gosh, he really did turn his hand to many things, didn't he?
Oh yeah, clever. Anything. He could do anything.
He was also in Canada representing Australia, is that right?
Gosh, well, only with his pottery. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And he was just, I mean, when Mum and Dad moved into Newport, they needed a new wall outside the house. Well, he and Anders designed they did like a concrete blocks, and Anders I remember ice cream tins, he made a mold out of and which they put the concrete in and built the whole wall outside, almost like what you call like a Besser block wall, but out of concrete. And just designed all that. So there's anything that he could turn his. And I remember I had a silver bangle at one stage that snapped in half, but Anders got some silver and he put it back together, and soldered it back together with an iron and with real silver and everything like that. A bit of a blob on it, of course, but that was from a young age. But he turned his hand to anything that he could. He was quite exceptional. Very talented.
Pam has just left some contact details, so I'll forward those on.
Oh, I'd love to. I'd love to.
Event.
She's so lovely. Pam was lovely. I remember her very well. She was very, very, very nice. to Anderson, very nice to all of us.
And Gigi has asked, do you plan to visit China before your new book?
You know what? I've been to China a couple of times. I actually love it. And Shenzhen, Hong Kong and Shenzhen. And I was actually going again next month. But of course, we actually just had to cancel today the reservation at the Shangri-La Hotel in Shenzhen, purely and simply because, well, we can't travel overseas, can we, with COVID?
No.
You know.
COVID. Well, and it's because of COVID that we're not actually sitting in a library and being able to,
I would have loved to
have your book signed at the end, but it have been sent out via chat, and we'll send it via email again. This hang on, it's a green screen, so you can't see it properly, but Red Herrings for breakfast is available, and we'll send out those purchase links as well. And if you put in library, if you buy it through Bad Apple Press, their website, if you put in the code library in the discount code, you'll get a 10% discount, and that's valid for another 2 weeks. And I'm sure if anybody is really wanting a book to be signed by Annabet, we can arrange that and make it happen.
Oh gosh, I'm happy to come over to the library if you leave some books and just sign whatever. I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, we can certainly facilitate whatever. And thank you to Waverley for supporting our event tonight as well. Thank you, Annabet, for your time. Honestly,
thank you.
You're listening to me. There is so much more going on in this book, and you do get a bit more insight into Andrews's thoughts through his journal entries. So it's well worth the read. And it's hopeful. Look at Annabet. She has come through all of these challenges and looks fantastic and still smiling and entertaining us here tonight. So thank you, Annabet. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. And thank you to everybody who attended this evening. I'd love to be able to have met all of you, but through the screen, thank you for your time. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And there's images in the books as well. We didn't actually go through them in great depth, but in the book there's a few pages of images, so you can see exactly what Anders looked like as a baby, and Annabet, and some more of the photos there. And yeah, as I've said, there's so many more stories that I wanted to talk about, but we have come to the end of time. So perhaps we'll have a part 2, maybe. I don't know if there's an appetite for it. I'm just going to pop up. I was going to tell everyone about the events that we've got coming up, but I think we've run out of time. So I'm just going to pop up the poll. And if everyone can please let us know how you felt about tonight. And if you've got any further feedback, let us know by our usual channels, Facebook, Instagram, and email. So I think if everyone can start polling, that would be great. And so, Annabet, whilst everyone's doing, one of the things I wanted to leave everyone with was what do you want people to take? What message do you want people to take from this book?
Well, I think that to just try and understand that everybody struggles. You know, and because you put a smile on your face and you get out there and people think everything's okay, I think that, you know, people have got to learn to speak if there's a problem and to try and communicate that they need for support, because I think my brother was terribly lonely at the end, and I think if he, like he said, if he had a partner or he had children, he probably wouldn't have gone and done what he did. And I think that it's very, very sad when people are lonely and they can't open up. So there's, you know, the thing that's going on now is, are you okay? And I think it's very important that we do speak to people and acknowledge that everyone is going through, especially at the moment. There's such difficult times for everybody, and suicide is rampant, really. You know, when you read about it, the amount of people that are losing their lives at the moment, it's incredibly distressing. And I think that we all have to try and look after one another and support one another, you know, and suicide, is just, there's no closure
No.
to suicide. You're always left with, I wonder if I'd said, if I did, if I could have been there. So I think to reach out at least when you feel that there is possibly somebody who is struggling. I think don't hold back. I think it's important that you do. I wish I had a lot more. My daughter warned me that there was a problem, and I didn't take any notice because I thought, no, he would speak out, but he didn't. See? And it possibly won't change the outcome, but it couldn't change the way you feel about the outcome.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for being with us tonight. And
my great pleasure. Thank you so much.
End it there. And